This is a homily for the Solemnity of the Most Holy Trinity. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 3, verses 16 to 18. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. The Legenda Aurea, or the Golden Legend in English, became one of the most widely read books in medieval Europe, second only to the Bible. It was compiled around 1260 by the Dominican friar Jacobus de Voragine, who later became Archbishop of Genoa. The word legend in the title does not mean a made-up story in the modern sense. In medieval Latin, legenda simply meant things to be read, especially stories of the saints that were read aloud in churches or used by preachers. The Dominicans, or order of preachers, had been founded earlier in the 13th century, and preachers needed accessible stories about biblical figures and saints that could be used in sermons. Jacobus compiled the Legenda Aurea precisely for this purpose. It was essentially a preacher's handbook, filled with lives of the saints, miracle stories, moral illustrations, and explanations of Christian feast days. Among the stories included in this collection is a well-known legend about Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo Regius in Roman North Africa. According to the story, Augustine was walking by the sea while reflecting on the mystery of the Trinity. I call this story a legend because it does not appear in any of Augustine's works, nor in the earliest biographies of him. The earliest known source for this story is the Legenda Aurea. It was not long before artists began to paint this story, and by the 15th and 16th centuries it had become a standard episode in cycles depicting the life of Augustine. One of the best-known versions is by one of the greatest painters of the Baroque period and one of the most influential artists in European history, Peter Paul Rubens. According to this legend, St. Augustine was walking along a beach and came across a young boy who had dug a hole in the sand. He was running back and forth between the sea and the hole, pouring seawater into the hole using a seashell. Augustine asked, "What are you doing?" The boy explained, "I'm emptying the ocean into this hole." Augustine, somewhat taken aback, replied, "You will never empty the ocean into that hole, even if you keep running back and forth for 1,000 years. The sea is so vast, and your hole is so small." According to the legend, the boy replied, "I have as much of a chance of doing this as you have of explaining the vast mystery of the Holy Trinity." The message of the story is not that thinking about God is useless. After all, Augustine had spent many years writing his great work De Trinitate, exploring the mystery of the Trinity with remarkable intellectual depth. Rather, the point is that the mystery of God exceeds even the greatest human intellect. As Augustine famously said, "Si enim comprehendis, non est Deus." If you have understood, then what you have understood is not God. The great Dominican theologian St. Thomas Aquinas said much the same thing when he wrote, "Quidquid potest intelligi vel cogitare, minus est ipso Deo." Whatever can be known or understood is less than God himself. In his work De Veritate he writes, "The essence of God himself remains forever hidden from us. The most we can know of God during our present life is that he transcends everything that we can conceive of him." We even need to be wary when we speak of God's existence. In The Matter with Things, psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist reminds us that God is, above all, not a thing alongside other things, even one equipped with ultra-special powers. God simply is. In a use of the verb that requires that we understand God both to have being and to be the ground of being at one and the same time. When it comes to explaining the mysteries of our faith, especially the mystery of the Holy Trinity, the words of T.S. Eliot from 4 quartets are apposite. Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place, will not stay still. McGilchrist tells us that nothing is less true than that we understand something only when we express it in language. On the contrary, language at times places a barrier between us and understanding, substitutes a crabbed expression for a living reality, and pretends to explain it away. The difficulty lies not in finding the right words, the difficulty lies in there being no right words. In other words, God is not a problem that can be solved. God is a mystery that we encounter. The etymology of our English word mystery is instructive. It comes from the Greek word mysterion. The word is related to the Greek verb muo, which means to close, especially to close the eyes or the mouth. From this comes the idea of silence and secrecy. I will not divulge what I have heard and seen. That helps us understand what people in the ancient world meant by a mysterion. In the Greek and Roman world, a mysterion referred especially to a sacred rite or hidden teaching disclosed only to those who had been initiated into it. It belonged to what scholars call the mystery religions. They were given that name precisely because their rites were not open to the public. They were reserved for initiates, and those initiates were expected to keep silence about what they had seen and heard. The connection with muo is important here. One closed the mouth. One did not speak openly of these sacred things to outsiders. That made these religions quite different from the ordinary public religion of the city. Public religion involved festivals, sacrifices, and civic ceremonies in which the whole community could take part. The mystery cults, by contrast, required a personal initiation. Their rites were performed behind closed doors, and only those who had undergone the proper ceremonies were admitted. Among the best known were the Eleusinian mysteries associated with Demeter and Persephone, the cult of Dionysus, the mysteries of Isis, and later the cult of Mithras. So they were called mysteries not because they were puzzles people could not solve, but because they were sacred realities hidden from the many and disclosed to a select few. A mysterion was not something you merely analysed, it was something into which you were admitted. When the New Testament takes up this word mysterion, it gives it a strikingly different meaning. In the mystery religions, the sacred secret was carefully guarded and revealed only to a small group of initiates. In the New Testament, the direction is almost the opposite. The mysterion is not a secret reserved for a privileged few. It is something that God himself has now made known. This is especially clear in the writings of Paul. For Paul, a mysterion is God's plan that had been hidden for ages but has now been revealed in Christ. In Colossians chapter 1 verses 26 and 27, for example, Paul speaks of the mystery hidden for ages and generations, but now revealed to his saints. In Ephesians chapter 3 verses 3 to 6, he explains that the mystery is God's purpose to bring Jews and Gentiles together into one people through Christ. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 51, he announces a mystery about the transformation of the dead at the resurrection. Listen, I will tell you a mystery. We will not all die, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. In other words, for Paul, the mysterion is not something concealed from the many. It is something once hidden, but now proclaimed. It is the saving purpose of God that human beings could never have discovered by their own wisdom, but which God has now revealed through Christ and made known through the preaching of the gospel. So there is a striking contrast with the ancient mystery religions and Christianity. In the mystery religions, the mystery was kept secret and shared only with initiates. In the New Testament, the mystery is revealed and proclaimed to the whole world. The gospel is not a secret rite whispered only to a few. It is a divine reality announced openly so that all may enter into it. And yet it still remains a mystery, not because it is hidden, but because the reality it reveals is deeper than the human mind can ever fully grasp. This means that our quest for God always involves a tug of war. It is a tug of war between the transcendence and the immanence of God. God is transcendent. God cannot be captured in any human words or images. As St. Thomas has told us, God transcends everything that we can conceive of him. But God is also immanent. By the way, don't confuse two similar-sounding English words, immanent spelt with an I and immanent spelt with an A. Immanent with the I means that something is about to happen. Immanent with the A means indwelling or existing within. It comes from the Latin in and manere, which means to stay or remain. So immanent refers to God's indwelling. In other words, God dwells among us and chooses to reveal himself to us. Jesus is the divine Word made flesh, the divine Word who dwelt among us and who promised the Spirit of truth who will lead us to the complete truth. Transcendence refers to God's total and utter otherness. Immanence refers to God's intimate and personal presence. In the prologue to John's Gospel, we read that the Word became flesh and lived among us. A literal translation of that verse is, the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us. The Greek verb translated as lived is eskenosen. The Greek verb used here is skenoo, which means to dwell in a tent. Just as God dwelt among his people in the tent of meeting during the Exodus from Egypt, in the Incarnation, God, in the person of Jesus, pitches his tent or becomes flesh and dwells among us. The transcendent God remains hidden. The immanent God chooses to reveal himself. In today's Gospel, John tells us that God loved the world. This would have sounded striking, even strange, in the intellectual and religious atmosphere of the Greco-Roman world. The idea that a God would love human beings and love them in a self-giving way was not typical of either Greek philosophy or popular pagan religion. A few examples from the Greco-Roman world will help us to see just how unusual this claim would have sounded. In the philosophical world of Aristotle, the idea that a God might love human beings would have seemed highly unlikely. Aristotle believed that the divine must be perfectly complete and lacking in nothing. A perfect being does not need anything and therefore has no reason to concern itself with the affairs of human beings. In the Metaphysics, Aristotle describes God as the unmoved mover, the ultimate explanation for why everything in the universe moves and changes. But this divine reality does not intervene in the world or concern itself with human affairs. Instead, Aristotle says that the divine life is perfect, eternal, and completely self-sufficient. God's activity consists entirely in thinking, and the only thing worthy of the divine intellect is the highest possible object, namely God himself. In simple terms, Aristotle's conclusion is that God's mind is occupied with thinking about itself, not with the changing world or with human beings. This understanding of the divine leads directly to Aristotle's view of the relationship between God and human beings. In the Nicomachean Ethics, he explains that friendship requires some degree of equality between the two parties. If the difference between them is too great, friendship becomes impossible. Aristotle therefore writes, when the distance between the parties becomes very great, as between God and man, friendship is no longer possible. He makes the point even more directly. If the persons are very far apart in excellence, as God is from man, they cannot be friends. For Aristotle, the gap between the divine and human beings is simply too great. God's life is perfect and self-sufficient, while human life is fragile and dependent. Because of that vast difference, Aristotle concludes that there can be no reciprocal relationship, no friendship between God and human beings. In the philosophy of Epicurus, the gods certainly exist, but they do not involve themselves in affairs of the world or in the lives of human beings. Epicurus believed that the divine nature is perfectly blessed and completely tranquil. Because the gods are perfectly happy, they are untouched by anxiety, anger, or concern for human affairs. In the letter to Manusius, Epicurus writes, "First believe that a God is a living being, immortal and blessed, and do not attribute to him anything inconsistent with immortality or incompatible with blessedness. For Epicurus, this perfect blessedness means that the gods must remain free from disturbance. If they became involved in human affairs, rewarding, punishing, or intervening, they would lose that perfect tranquility. For that reason, Epicurus insists the blessed and immortal nature knows no trouble itself, nor does it bring trouble upon any other being. Therefore, it is not affected by anger or favour. In other words, the gods exist in a state of serene perfection, untouched by the struggles of human life. Human beings may admire the gods as an example of perfect tranquility, but the gods themselves remain indifferent and uninvolved. In the philosophy of Stoicism, the divine was understood not primarily as a personal being who relates to individuals, but as the rational principle that orders and permeates the entire cosmos. The Stoics spoke of this divine principle as the logos, the rational structure that gives coherence to the universe. God in Stoic thought is therefore identified with the rational order of nature itself. The Roman Stoic Marcus Aurelius expresses this view succinctly in his Meditations. Constantly regard the universe as one living being, having one substance and one soul. Within this framework, the divine is not distant from the world, but fully immanent within it. The universe itself is permeated by divine reason. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca writes, God is near you, he is with you, he is within you. Yet, this divine presence is not conceived in terms of personal affection or emotional attachment toward individual human beings. Rather, the divine governs the world through rational necessity. The cosmos unfolds according to an ordered and intelligible structure that expresses divine reason. Seneca therefore describes the relationship between God and the world in terms of rational order rather than personal concern. God is the mind of the universe. Similarly, Epictetus speaks of the divine as the rational source of all things and emphasizes that human beings participate in that rational order. You are a fragment of God. You have within you a portion of Him. For the Stoics, therefore, the divine is not characterized by emotional involvement with human beings, but by rational governance of the cosmos. Human beings are called to live in harmony with this rational order, accepting the structure of reality as an expression of divine reason. As Marcus Aurelius puts it, all things are interwoven with one another, and the bond is sacred. The Stoic vision of the divine thus emphasizes rational order, cosmic unity, and the participation in universal reason, rather than any notion of personal affection between the divine and individual human beings. In ordinary Greek and Roman religion, the gods were believed to be very powerful but unpredictable. People did not assume that the gods loved human beings. Instead, they tried to keep the gods happy by offering sacrifices, making vows, and performing rituals. The hope was that the gods would grant favour, or at least not become angry. Greek poets often describe the gods as being deeply involved in human affairs, but not in a kind or caring way. Their actions are often driven by rivalry, pride, or personal preference. For example, in the Iliad, the poet Homer portrays the gods constantly interfering in the Trojan War. Some gods support certain heroes while others oppose them, depending on their own quarrels. At the beginning of the Odyssey, Zeus complains that human beings often blame the gods for every misfortune. "Ah, how shameless are mortals! They blame the gods, for they say their troubles come from us, but they themselves, through their own recklessness, bring sorrows beyond what is fated." Zeus's point is not that the gods never bring suffering, but that human beings often cause their own troubles and then blame the gods for them. Even so, the gods in Homer's world still exercise enormous power over human life. In the Iliad, Zeus decides which warriors will die in battle by weighing their fate on golden scales. Greek tragedy presents a similar picture. In the play Hippolytus, the dramatist Euripides tells the story of a young man destroyed by the goddess Aphrodite, simply because he refused to honour her properly. At the beginning of the play, she declares, "I honour those who respect my power, but I destroy those who treat me with contempt." Because of this, religion often functioned as a system of exchange. Human beings approached the gods with offerings, sacrifices, and prayers, expecting that the gods would respond with favour. If people honoured the gods properly, they hoped the gods would grant protection, prosperity, success in war, good harvests, or the safety of the household. If the gods were neglected or offended, people feared that misfortune might follow. This way of thinking is sometimes summed up by the Latin expression "do ut des," I give so that you may give. Human beings give honour, sacrifices, and ritual observances to the gods. In return, they hope to receive benefits from the gods. The Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero expressed this understanding very succinctly when he wrote that piety is justice toward the gods. By this he meant that human beings owe the gods their proper respect, worship, and ritual observance, just as justice among human beings means giving each person what is due to them. To be pious, to possess pietas, was therefore to honour the gods faithfully, to perform the required sacrifices, and to maintain the traditional religious practices that secured the well-being of the community. In this framework, religion was not primarily about love between the gods and human beings. Rather, it was about maintaining the correct relationship with divine power through honour, ritual, and reciprocity. By giving the gods what was owed to them, people hoped to ensure that the gods would continue to favour their families, their cities, and their world. Against this background, the words of today's gospel take on a remarkable clarity and force. In a world where philosophers often describe the divine as self-absorbed, distant, or indifferent to human affairs, and where popular religion portrayed the gods as powerful but unpredictable, the Gospel of John makes a startling proclamation. John writes, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. This is not the language of divine detachment or cosmic indifference. It is the language of self-giving love. The God whom John proclaims is not remote from the world, but deeply engaged with it, not indifferent to human destiny, but moved by love for it. The mystery that had been hidden is now revealed in the most concrete way imaginable. God gives himself for the life of the world. And John goes further. He does not say simply that God loved a righteous people, or a faithful nation, or those who had already turned towards him. He says that God loved the world. In John's Gospel, the word world, cosmos, often refers precisely to humanity in its estrangement from God. Yet it is this very world that God loves. The divine initiative begins not with human virtue, but with divine generosity. This is the movement described in John chapter 3, verse 17. God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. The coming of Christ is therefore not an act of judgment imposed from above, but an act of love offered to the world. The decisive question is not whether God is willing to save, but whether human beings are willing to receive what God has given. In that sense, the gospel places before us both a revelation and a decision. The revelation of God's love and the invitation to trust in the one whom God has sent.